Hey all, Alex here at your home of the Music Deep Dive, and today it's time to bring back my record collection tour. It's been about 2 months or so, I think, since I've done one of these videos. This is part 14. The last part 13, was also when I talked about Elton John, and I think nothing but Elton John in that installment, and actually got quite a solid set of reviews. One of the kind of best videos that I've done in a while, I think. So thank you to everyone who's watched it and who supported it. But now we are going to jump back in. This installment is actually going to be somewhat similar in that it's going to be dominated by one artist, or band in this case, and I think people will be a little bit surprised when they figure out who it is, but we will get to it. I'm just going to jump right in. So like I said, we left off with Elton John, and we're going to start still in the J's, a couple more to go. We have Bruce Johnston, Going Public. All right. Bruce Johnston, if you're not aware of the name, Bruce Johnston was with the Beach Boys, still is with the Beach Boys. He wasn't an original member, but he is the only member of kind of the core Beach Boys group, apart from Mike Love, who is still with the touring band. He has a couple of solo albums. This is the only one I have on vinyl here. It's not very good. It is very saccharine. It contains his version of I Write the Songs, which is a track that he wrote and Barry Manilow made, I believe, a #1 hit. It won Johnston a Grammy, I know that much. And you know, Johnston works in the context of Beach Boys albums where his songs are kind of changes of pace. He does like 1 or 2 songs a piece on each of these records, but a whole album of his kind of very lightweight, late 70s soft pop stuff, not my thing. Not my thing at all. Not much to recommend there, so kind of a bit of a rough start. This record I got as part of another collection. I have not actually heard this. Howard Jones, Humans Lib. I've heard good things about Howard Jones. This record came out, what year? 84, it looks like. I've heard good things about him, but I cannot say that I've heard a full-length album, so this is certain to be on my list at some point in the future. This record I have heard, though. Tom Jones, a bargain bin record here. It's not unusual. This was his first album back in 65, I believe. And Tom Jones is kind of, take a look at that back cover photo. That's very funny. Tom Jones is an interesting figure. Again, kind of a silly artist, and an artist who's sort of easy to make fun of now. But have to respect the guy for grinding it out as long as he has. And continue, the guy had, still to this day has a very impressive voice, but at his peak, I mean, there were very few white male singers, certainly, who could sing with the power and force and genuine soul that he did. So it's not unusual as a great pop song to me. I'm not familiar with his work in depth, although that may change at some point soon enough. We shall see. But this is a great, it's a strong starting point, and he's got some absolute bangers. I've got, I think, a couple of Journey records coming up next. Here is Escape. The funny part is that I'm pretty sure neither of these are probably my favorite Journey albums. I think my favorite would probably be Infinity. Hard to say. It's been a while since I've heard the Journey discography, and I think even then I stopped after the Steve Perry stuff. Don't Stop Believin'. I mean, if we're talking about radio rock songs that I have gotten sick of, most of the tracks that you hear in classic rock radio, I've been able to regain a love for. I used to be totally sick of Hotel California, for instance, and I've sort of regained my love for that. Don't Stop Believin' is one of the stragglers. I still can't really listen to that song right now. And that's after having not listened to radio for, I don't know, 5 years at least on a regular basis. But I can't deny that it's a fantastic vocal performance, just as pretty much everything on any of these Journey records is when you're talking about Steve Perry. Um, Although I will make the point that I think goes a little bit understated that Steve Perry takes a lot of his sound from Sam Cooke. Um, Perry approaches it in a slightly different way, I think. Like, he is very much more willing to use his high register than Sam Cooke was, but there is a lot of overlap in their kind of tonal approaches to things. So if you like Steve Perry and if you think he's one of the greatest rock singers of all time, I agree. I agree on that point. And check out Sam Cooke. And then I have Frontiers here. I was totally blanking on the name of this record. It's the one with Separate Ways on it. That's what I remember. Separate Ways is fun. I remember thinking the sound of this record is like, I mean, it makes sense that they were to go into this much more synth heavy direction. I remember thinking it was a little bit strange. It gets a little bit silly at times. But I can't deny some of the songs on here. Separate Ways being the obvious one. That was one of the first songs I learned how to play on the drums way back in the day. All right. A couple of Kansas records. We're getting into the K's now. Left Overture. Probably my favorite Kansas record. Just kind of front to back, I think this has the strongest collection of songs. Highlights for me being Carry On Wayward Son, another one that I used to be sick of but has grown on me now. And Miracles Out of Nowhere. I think Miracles Out of Nowhere is a fantastic song. Kansas, one of those bands that I've never really fallen in love with. I've heard a lot of their stuff over the years, but never really fallen in love with them compared to other classic rock or prog rock adjacent bands, But solid stuff for sure. And then a live record that I've actually have not heard, two for the show. This is a double record here. I'll show you the gatefold. I also got this as part of another collection, I believe. But yeah, it's got, when did it come out? 78. So without having referenced the list of other Kansas live records, this is me just speculating. I'm sure this is probably going to be the best example of how they sound live, because this is during or immediately after their peak as a band, and it has a lot of their kind of essential songs from this era. But I have not heard it, so I won't make a value judgment. If someone else has heard it, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. All right. Okay, this one is interesting. This is an EP. This is Avi Kaplan's Lean On Me EP, which, as you can see here, is actually autographed. It's one of the only autographed records that I own. Avi Kaplan he's a folk singer. He was actually part of the a cappella group Pentatonics at one point. He was their bass singer. He left the band under circumstances which originally seemed cut and dry, like he didn't want to be part of the band, and now there's been other stuff that's come out that's like, oh, maybe he was actually a major dick. I don't know. But what I will say is that I have liked his solo material a fair bit, although I've not heard his most recent full-length album. Lean On Me, it's a 4-song EP. It's very short, and it contains alternative versions, or mostly alternative versions of tracks that he released on his first EP. It wasn't a full-length album. I think that one was an EP too, but that one had like 6 or 7 songs, and this one has only 4. And these are like stripped back acoustic versions, no like overdubbed vocals and percussion and stuff like that, like he does with the other songs. I'll Get By is the name of that EP, by the way. This is autographed because he did a show at the Cedar Cultural Center I think it was just last year, actually, that he did it down in Minneapolis, and he autographed a bunch of his records, and some of them got sent to the Electric Fetus record store, and I was lucky enough to find one of them and decided, yeah, I'll pick it up. I'll take an autographed version of that record. He's a fantastic singer. He was actually, I learned a lot from listening to his records as a vocalist. So in that sense, even if the guy isn't a great person, I still take that influence from him. Kenny G, Duotones. I have not heard this album either. I've got nothing against Kenny G. I know, again, he's kind of an easy figure to make fun of because he sits in that easy listening genre. I think everybody who sits in that easy listening genre is probably an easy punching bag for people, which I think is a little bit unfair. But yeah, I mean, I'm not saying Kenny G adds a ton to the world as far as like musical creativity, at least his records don't, but I can't deny the guy's a fantastic player. So I've not heard that album yet. Again, another one that was part of another collection, but happy to own it. This one I know, though. This one I know very well. Kids See Ghosts. Add another hip-hop album to the table here. This record is like back when this came out. I remember the whole Kanye release cycle from summer of 2018 like it was yesterday. I mean, this was such a major bit of hype coming out. And spoiler alert, this is the only Kanye record or Kanye adjacent record that I own. I don't own anything else of his on vinyl. I will look to change that despite everything else that's gone on with him. I do want to own some of his stuff on vinyl, but this is the only one I have right now. But no, Kids See Ghosts dominated my summer of 2018 listening, not even by choice necessarily, just I could not avoid hearing those songs. I used to work at Domino's back in the day. That was kind of my summer job during college, and the kind of opening manager there, who I would work with, he always jammed out to this album. That was like his album of the year. So Reborn, Kids See Ghosts, Feel the Love, I mean, all those songs were just on repeat, so they're etched in my brain. But it's fantastic. I mean, I haven't even mentioned Kid Cudi, but I mean, he absolutely steals the show when he's on here. Kanye's production is fantastic. I don't know where this ranks. It's certainly my favorite Kid Cudi related project. I think as far as Kanye projects go, hard to say. It's probably top 3. I think, it's probably behind My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, and might put it below The College Dropout too, but it's close. It's top 2, top 3. 808s. 808s is up there too. So it's hard. One year I'll do a Kanye ranking video. Carole King, Tapestry. I've not heard this album in a really long time. I have heard it, but it's been a long time, so I can't. I remember really liking it when I heard it, because, yeah, I mean, so many of these songs are stone cold classics for one reason or another, whether it's her rendition, whether it's someone else's rendition. And so many of them are, again, staples of, classic rock, oldies, radio. But I think listening to it now, I would probably adore it. I'm very curious to see if anyone who is watching this video has explored other Carole King records, because that's where my fascination is. I know Tapestry is a classic. Everyone says so. But what is her other stuff like? I'm very curious to explore that one day, and I'm curious if any of you have heard it. So if you could give me feedback, what is your favorite Carole King album that isn't Tapestry? I'd be very curious. I own this one. Again, this was part of another collection, though. So I have not heard it. 1982's 1 to 1 from Carole King. I do not recognize any of these songs, so I don't think these are ones I've heard in passing either. So I will hold off of judgment. But I'm curious if you like that one. Okay, and now we get to the band that I was talking about that would dominate this video. I'm going to try to blaze through these because there probably isn't a whole lot to talk about, and I will probably do a discography ranking video on them at some point in the not super distant future. But back in, when would this have been? 2019, early 2020, I got really into the Kingston Trio. The Kingston Trio, obviously a trio stemming from California, really important figures in the emergence and popularization of folk music, to the point where they were so pop that a lot of like traditional folk musicians looked down on them. I mean, if you listen to interviews and stuff like that, the only major folk musician who didn't really turn their noses up at the trio was freaking Bob Dylan, which is really funny. But I got really into the trio for a while. I think it was something to do with, like, emotionally, I was not in a great place, and there was a lot of like music that I had a tough time listening to because it was too, like, it confronted things too much. I just wanted to listen to something that was easy, that was kind of breezy, and could occupy my time while I was driving. And the trio fit that bill. Their music is nothing if not really breezy and really lightweight, but it's really well done. It's actually exceptionally well done sometimes. They were really strong vocalists. The production, I mean, you know, they were on Capitol Records for the majority of their time, so it's well produced, very well arranged. Some of the arrangements, I'm like, wow, I'm really surprised, but there is some stuff there where the sophistication is approaching like Beach Boys level as far as how the voices are kind of interacting with each other. So yeah, don't underestimate them. Don't underestimate them. But we'll talk about these records because I'm actually, I think, completely complete on them. I don't think I'm missing any records, including their live stuff. That's also helped by the fact that most of these records are like bargain bin records too, so they're very easy to collect. But anyways, without further ado, let's go through them. Self-titled record from 1958. This album it's the only one that is like, if you listen to it on Spotify, it's in mono. There's no stereo version at all. And they're very much trying to find their sound. They actually like started out as a calypso act, and did a lot of calypso songs, which is very interesting. So they're trying to they do some stuff in that vein. There's some more traditional English folk songs. This record is their most famous just because it has by far their most famous song, Tom Dooley, which became a #1 hit. Also contains Scotch and Soda, which is Bob Shane's lead vocal, and is terrific. Bob Shane, I love him as a singer. Just a super, like, there's so much personality in his voice. I think it's just fantastic. And then their rendition of Sloop John B., which was inspired, which the Beach Boys' Al Jardine heard. Jardine then had Brian Wilson listen to it, and it was from this rendition that Brian deconstructed and then reconstructed the arrangement for Pet Sounds. The one thing I will say, and this is going to be a frequent theme with these trio records, is there are going to be songs, they're usually good for at least a song, maybe two an album, where they try to do something that is not in the English language. And sometimes it works, like when they do traditional Hawaiian songs. Two of the members were from Hawaii, so it works in that sense because it is culturally appropriate. But a lot of times they are trying to do songs, and let's just say they're doing these tracks in ways that have not aged well at all, and that extends to some of the calypso songs too. I don't know if the intent was to be completely disrespectful. I think it was just, you know, it's a parody. They're not taking themselves too seriously, and it has not aged well. So that's one thing to keep in mind with many of these records. Live album from The Hungry Eye. The Hungry Eye was a performance venue in, it was in San Fran, I think, right? The Hungry Eye Cafe. But it's a solid live album. I really like the version of They Called the Wind Mariah. Again, Bob Shane on vocals. That's kind of a consistent thing with me. I love Bob Shane as a singer. And, you know, they're listening to their between songs banter is another thing. It's very, you know, they were big with college audiences. So there's a bit of a Tom Lehrer sort of um, I guess, like, disdain, again, not taking themselves too seriously. And I'm blanking on the word that I'm trying to use, but there's a lot of sarcasm in their banter, and that's true throughout all of the live albums that we'd end up talking about. Same is true for this one, Stereo Concert. The shrink wrap is ripped on here, but stereo live album, that's the appeal. And it's interesting just in the sense of you get to hear live renditions of a lot of the songs from the debut. Hungry Eye, there's actually, I think, no overlap at all from the debut album. It's completely different songs, none of which made it onto a studio album afterwards. Stereo Concert, however, is mostly songs from the debut, and so you get to hear them in stereo. You get to hear the individual parts isolated a bit, which is really nice. So there's appeal there. Kingston Trio at Large, 1959, second record. They're starting to release them in stereo, although I believe this is just the mono edition. MTA was the biggest hit off of this one, about the Boston Metropolitan Transit Authority. There's several other solid tracks on here, like their rendition of Darling Corey, which they retitle Corey Corey. Another thing they do, they take these traditional songs or songs that were written by other people, rename them slightly, and then take writing credit for it. This is mostly true for like traditional songs, but that was something that ended up causing some tension in the band, which is why the original member Dave Guard left. Getaway John is really strong, and I really like their rendition of All My Sorrows. Is it as good as Joan Baez's rendition? Not quite, but it's really good. It's up there. Here We Go Again, also from 59. This one is interesting because it has, I believe, 2 songs written by Jon Stewart. And I'm not talking about Daily Show Jon Stewart. I'm talking about Jon Stewart, who would become member of the Kingston Trio after Dave Guard left. Stewart would also go on to do stuff like writing the song Daydream Believer for the Monkees. So there's a few strong songs on here. I like their rendition of Woody Guthrie's A Worried Man. There's another Beach Boys connection here, the song The Wanderer, which Nick Reynolds sings lead on. That song was essentially ripped off wholesale by Al Jardine for the song Looking at Tomorrow from the Surf's Up album. So, again, all these connections. And there's going to be one more on here, on this record, Sold Out, from 1960 now. Sold Out is interesting because it's probably my least favorite record of theirs to this point, because this one I think is extremely guilty of having some of the culturally inappropriate or insensitive songs, shall we say. But it has stuff like With You, My Johnny, which is some of the best vocal arranging and leaping around between them. I think it's terrific. And then it has Raspberry Strawberries, which was an inspiration for the Beach Boys song At My Window, which I think is really cool. I also like El Matador. That's one of the few times where it kind of works, because like it's so satirical, and they don't do the kind of culturally insensitive like whooping and shit like that they do on like Mexican songs, for instance. They play this one a little bit more straight, which I appreciate. And The Hunter is pretty good too. And then we get to String Along, which to me, if we're talking about the albums from the Dave Guard era, you have the Guard era, you have the Jon Stewart era. String Along with the Kingston Trio, to me, is the best album of the Guard era. Because you get, it's just, they're on fire as performers here. You have stuff like The Escape of Old John Webb. Leave My Woman Alone, a Ray Charles cover, is really strange. They kind of make it work to the point where I can appreciate it, at least. But then you have This Morning, This Evening, So Soon, Buddy Better Get On Down the Line, Who's Gonna Hold Her Hand, and Colorado Trail, which are 4 of the best songs they ever did, as far as I'm concerned. Everglades is fun too. So yeah, String Along to me is just that's one of their strongest collections of performances ever, and might be their strongest, frankly. I'm not sure where that ranks to the best compared to the best Jon Stewart albums, so we'll have to see. Their Christmas album, The Last Month of the Year. The Last Month of the Year is actually a really great Christmas record, and contains a very interesting selection. This is mostly going to be traditional English carols and stuff. So you have Bye Bye Thou Little Tiny Child, which you may have heard as the Coventry Carol before. I like their rendition of Somerset, Gloucestershire, Wassail, Merry Mild, and The White Snows of Winter, which is an adaptation of a melody from the Symphony Number 1 by Brahms, is really beautiful. Again, Shane coming in with just some terrific vocals there. Make Way. This is actually the first Trio album I ever heard. I think the song Hangman off of this record was my first exposure to them. It's pretty fast-paced, pretty breezy record. I was going to say not one of their more substantial records, but they don't really have a whole lot of substantive records, frankly. Again, hard traveling. They do Woody Guthrie pretty effectively throughout their career. The River is Wide is nice. And I like Blow the Candle Out, too. And then Going Places is the last record that they did with Guard. And you can kind of feel that this album, like, there's certain moments where it feels like these tracks are a little bit rushed. I wouldn't say this album features them at their peak. They have some strong songs. There's a couple of tracks on here that are outtakes from String Along. Coast of California being the most obvious one. I mean, that's a fantastic performance. It also contains It Was a Very Good Year. It Was a Very Good Year is an interesting track in that I think this is the earliest prominent recording of that song. Frank Sinatra would end up being the one who popularized it, but from what I understand, Sinatra used Shane's rendition, Bob Shane's vocal, as a frame of reference for his own performance, which is cool. You Don't Knock at the end, kind of strange little like Staple Singers type of gospel piece, which I don't know if they make it work. I enjoy it probably more than I should, but it's still kind of a strange way to end off their career, or end off the Dave Guard era, I should say. Jon Stewart, there he is right there. The Kingston Trio, Close Up. This album is interesting because in this record, they really tried to keep the formula of the Guard records. So again, this is a lot of kind of renditions of traditional English songs, traditional American songs, maybe one or two pieces by contemporary singer-songwriters. But song selection-wise, it is pretty much identical. And the thing you'll notice with Jon Stewart is that because Stewart could actually write his own songs, there is more of a transition into focusing on not just Stewart's songs, but also other kind of, whether it's Greenwich Village singer-songwriters or just other folk singers and songwriters from that era. Some of that is a product of Stewart just being more aware of that type of stuff. Some of it is a product, some of it's a product of just the scene was exploding at that time. I mean, we're in 1961, about to go into 1962. And, this is right before Bob Dylan steals the show and dominates everything. So there's a lot of material to select from, and there's going to be some very inspired song choices coming up that I think are really cool. College Concert, recorded at UCLA in very late 61. This has some a couple of songs from Close Up, a couple of songs from previous albums. You have Coplas from the debut. Oken Karange from Close Up, like I said. It also has Where Have All the Flowers Gone? Where Have All the Flowers Gone was, I believe, their biggest hit that wasn't Tom Dooley. I think it got to number 2 or number 3 in the charts. And this is not, obviously, this is not that rendition because this is a live version, but the song, despite not being theirs, I think they make it theirs because they play it so straight. And the harmonies, they're a little bit Peter, Paul, and Mary, I suppose. You could treat it in that sense. But I do think that that kind of approach, I don't know if it makes theirs the definitive version of the song, but it's pretty damn close. And yeah, College Concert just has a great energy to it. I do like it. Something Special from 62 here. This one is interesting because it features the trio with a something special behind them, as they say. In this case, it is an orchestral arrangement done by Jimmy Haskell. I don't know that it works, frankly. I think the orchestra drowns them out in a lot of ways and is kind of overwrought sometimes. But some of the core songs here are solid. I like Oh Willow Whaley. I like Pulling Away a lot. She Was Too Good to Me is pretty good. But I do think that the trio, I wouldn't even say it's the trio feeling out of their comfort zone because I'm pretty sure the orchestra was just overdubbed later, but it's not a very natural sound, and I think that lessens this record's appeal. It's not at the very bottom of my trio albums list, but it's definitely in the lower half. Now we get to some really good stuff, though. I really like New Frontier from 62. They really kind of take a leap forward here. They're experimenting with like Capitol Records Echo Chamber here, so these songs sound massive. Greenback Dollar is a Hoyt Axton song. I think they do it fantastically here. It's maybe my favorite trio song, or certainly in the conversation. It was the first one that I was like, yes, I'm obsessed with this. To Be Redeemed is great. Poor Ellen Smith. Long Black Veil, that cover is good. It's a very, I guess, uplifting album. It's very, the title is taken from like a JFK quote. It's very optimistic, and paints a very rosy picture of the future that is going to get completely just shot down a year later. This comes out in November, December of 62. JFK is assassinated a year later, and you hear that transition in their albums, which we'll get to. But New Frontier is very bubbly. It's very upbeat. It's very enjoyable. I have a lot of fun with it. One of my favorites for sure. As is this one, the boringly named Kingston Trio number 16. The song selection here, I think, just takes another leap forward. Reverend Mr. Black is good. This was a reasonably good chart success. I'm trying to remember if this was their last song that hit the top 40 or whether it was a top 20 or something like that. Road to Freedom is really good. One More Round, Run the Ridges, Try to Remember. And then Ballad of the Quiet Fighter, there's Jon Stewart coming in from the songwriting standpoint, and this is the first like legitimately great song that he's contributed. The guitar parts on that one are just really captivating, lovely kind of back and forth with acoustic guitars here. And then La Bamba at the end, because we can't have a perfect trio record, and there's got to be something that still hits the mark for being kind of offensive. Sunny Side from 1963, awful album cover, just really terrible like color choice and everything. Sunny Side feels kind of rushed. Production wise, this sounds much weaker compared to anything else from the period. I still like the songs here quite a bit. I just think that none of it sounds entirely finished. It doesn't sound very clean. but the core tracks here are solid. Desert Pete is really good. There's actually a cameo in the high harmonies there, as well as the banjo part from Glenn Campbell. Glenn Campbell played with the trio on several of their records from this period. I like Sing Out, Ballad of the Thresher, 210, 618, and then Those Who Are Wise might be my favorite Jon Stewart song that he wrote during his time in the trio. It's certainly up there. I think it's just a really lovely, lovely track with some fantastic harmonies. And apparently he thought so too, because I think he re-recorded it in either the 80s or the 90s. It wasn't, I don't like the re-recording very much, but that original is fantastic. And then Time to Think from 1963, which is probably my favorite Jon Stewart album during his time here. Time to Think was, for the most part, recorded immediately after the JFK assassination, and the overall theme here is kind of presenting these songs about more serious and, I guess, topical issues. So, Song for a Friend, as they note kind of on the back here, was written after JFK's death, supposedly written the day that he died. But then these other songs are very kind of intentionally socially conscious. You have Coal Tattoo, about kind of coal miners, which is a fantastic, frenetic song. Just some terrific banjo playing and guitar playing in the background there. Hobo's Lullaby is another one. There's another Woody Guthrie cover with Deportee. If You Don't Look Around, which I believe was about the March on Selma, I want to say. And then the first English rendition of the track Seasons in the Sun, which is another interesting footnote. Of course, became a number one hit in 74, I believe it was, by Terry Jacks. I don't know if this is my favorite overall Kingston Trio record. It's one that I'd have to kind of sit with for a while. But it's probably my favorite of the Jon Stewart era. And I think, you know, they would never get this serious or this politically aware again. But hearing them kind of just no frills, like focus on what they are doing, to me proves that, you know, proves how strong of craftsmen they were. Proves how effective of performers they were. And for all the kind of frills and the joking and the nonsense that really prevent most of their albums from being actually great, Time to Think is one that I think actually works as a collective record, and one that I would actually recommend unironically to people with no kind of qualifications of, well, be careful of this or that or the other thing. You know, I just think it's overall just a really strong, great album. Back in Town, this was their last album that they released with Capitol. It's another live album from The Hungry Eye. Only song on here that was actually released on a previous record was Tom Dooley, actually. There's a rendition of that on here. Otherwise, it's a solid song selection. I used to listen to this album quite a bit, actually, in the car, and I don't know why. But I like Georgia Stockade, Walking This Road to My Town, World I Used to Know. There's also a version of Let's Get Together, which the Youngbloods made a really big hit a couple of years later. And then there's like a little Mason Williams parody towards the end, them poems. But yeah, Back in Town, solid live album, but kind of an interesting way to end their career at Capitol. They then go to Decca after that, which is where they essentially finish out their career, and they released 4 albums with Decca. The weakness with the Decca records is that Capitol's recording studios were state-of-the-art. They were probably some of the best recording studios around, and you really hear that, especially towards the end, with what they're doing. Decca was not that. That said, you don't hear it as much on this first record. It's technically self-titled, but people also refer to it as Nick, Bob, and John, and that's how you'll probably hear it referred to the most. This record sounds pretty good still. And it's got a lot of strong performances. Midnight Special, Love's Been Good to Me. Actually, that whole first side, I think, is pretty strong, like across the board. Really, really excellent. Side 2 is a little bit weaker. I don't love, like, Love Comes a Trickling Down, but the cover of Tom Paxton's My Ramblin' Boy, Farewell, Bob Dylan cover on here. They've covered Dylan a couple of times. They did Blowin' in the Wind on Sunnyside too. And then ending with I'm Going Home. You know, there's a lot of strong songs on here. This is a really good album. But it does miss at least some of the life from the best Capitol records. And then that life is kind of extinguished on these next albums. Stay a While from 65. I'm not even trying to be negative about this album because I actually really do like quite a few of the songs on here, but it doesn't sound very good. It really doesn't sound very good. That opening track, Hannah Lee, there's like a harmonica that is absolutely piercing and grating. I will say the version that is on streaming services, I have like a CD copy of this album. The version that is on streaming services does not do this album justice because it sounds worse. But even the main version of it just sounds kind of muddied and not very clear. That said, Rusting in the Rain is a great song. I really love their version of that. Again, another couple of Tom Paxton covers, Bottle of Wine and Where I'm Bound, that I think are really good. And Gonna Go Down the River is fun. Dooley is fun. But not a highlight of their career by any means. Mostly because of that kind of sonic idea that I was explaining. And then the bottom kind of falls out for the last two records. Neither of them are bad per se, but again, weaker sonically and with much weaker song selections. Something Else from 1965. This album actually isn't even, well, it is technically available on CD. It's only available through their website. And it's interesting just because, like, Discogs, I don't even think has an entry for it. I know I created one at one point because they didn't have an entry for the CD. I don't know if it ever actually got, like, approved or anything. But Something Else is not very good. It just isn't. Parchment Farm Blues is very strange. Very strange Book of White cover. Go Tell Roger is very strange. There's one thing that Jon Stewart does in his writing that I think is kind of bizarre, which is he writes these songs consistently from the perspectives of children, but he's also trying to tackle like deeper social issues. Little Play Soldiers from Nick, Bob, and John is another one. But I don't know. I don't know if it ever sticks to landing. I understand what he's trying to do, and the perspective that he's trying to create, but I don't think it's not necessarily my thing. Couple of covers I do like on here. I like their rendition of Gordon Lightfoot's Early Morning Rain, Tom Paxton's Last Thing on My Mind, They Are Gone, Red River Shore. There's some good stuff on here, but certainly probably their weakest album to that point. And then I think it gets even weaker with 1966's Children of the Morning. There's a Beatles cover on here, which is fun, Norwegian Wood. It's unironically, I think, one of the best things on here. Jon Stewart, I feel bad being negative about this album because this is the one where Jon Stewart all of a sudden dominates the songwriting. He writes, 8 songs out of 12? And, you know, in a way I applaud that because that's a very different approach from what they had been doing in the past. But boy, no, I'm not big on these songs, if I'm being honest. The ones that I like the most are probably the title track's fine. When You've Been Away for a Long Time and Lock All the Windows might be my favorites. The Spinning of the World is interesting because they actually did a trio reunion special on PBS in the early 80s. And it was interesting because they reunited. Jon Stewart was there. They got Dave Guard back for the first time in 20 years. But in the backing band, kind of subtly, was Lindsey Buckingham. Lindsey Buckingham was, I think, playing bass or a backing guitar or something as part of the backing group. And he duetted with Jon Stewart on this song. Just a very kind of strange pull in a very, kind of a bizarre little footnote in the trio's career and certainly in Buckingham's career. But Children of the Morning to me, I think, is just absolutely killed by its sound. I think it sounds terrible. Even the CD copy of it that I have can't really save this record. And everyone sounds tired on it too, which I don't think helps. I think the trio was pretty solidly moving in the direction of splitting up at this point. Although you do hear, there are like recordings from 66 and I think even maybe 67 where they're trying to do more, they're trying to dabble a little bit more into kind of psychedelia and contemporary rock and things like that. Kind of messing around. There's a couple of Donovan covers on that. They're available on streaming services if you want to check them out. It's not all that great, but it's fascinating to kind of hear what direction they would have gone down. But they didn't. That ended up being their last proper studio album. There is Once Upon a Time. This was released in, I want to say, 69. But this is a recording of what I believe was their last proper live show from 66, 67. Again, I'm blanking on the year. It's an interesting collection of songs on here. Probably about half of the tracks on here were not even officially released on Kingston Trio studio albums. Maybe even a little bit more than that. And then there's some other interesting covers. There's a couple of Bob Dylan covers on here. Also a Donovan cover of the song Colors. They do Goodnight Irene as a tribute to the Weavers, who were very influential to them. But it's not essential trio live stuff. This was also not released on Capitol or Decca. This was released on something called Tetragrammaton Records, which probably tells you kind of the extent of their appeal at that point. And so after that, the trio disbanded. Now, since then, I mean, they've done reunions and stuff like that. Jon Stewart had a very productive solo career, released a number of albums. But the trio, in its own way, ended up reforming just a few years later. Bob Shane reformed the trio with a couple of new members. And I think they initially branded themselves as the New Kingston Trio, and then they just became known as the Kingston Trio because they got the rights to the name. And since then, the trio, in some way or another, has continued performing to this day with a rotating cast of characters. I think Bob Shane was part of it until the mid-2000s. And even then, he would play shows periodically with them until he died in 2020. That rendition, that iteration of the trio has released a bunch of albums, both live albums and studio albums, that I have no real interest in covering, but I will talk about this one. Not that I've heard it, but I do own it. This is Aspen Gold from, when did this come out? 1981. So this came out at around the same time that they did the PBS reunion special. It was the same year. And this is the only record as part of that new lineup that I think some people consider to be quote unquote canon. For the most part, this is covers of songs that the trio had recorded beforehand, which is really the case for a lot of the other ones. I mean, if you look at the trio on Spotify, their most recent albums from the 2010s or whatever, like it's mostly covers of old trio songs or songs that were released during that period. So you have Worried Man, Greenback Dollar, Reuben James, Hard Ain't It Hard, Scotch and Soda, MTA, Tom Dooley, stuff like that. Like I said, I've not listened to it, so I can't put a value judgment on it. But what I will say is that Bob Shane's vocals. I love Bob Shane as a singer in the 60s, but you do hear his voice start to you hear him start to lose his range a little bit, becomes a little bit more gravelly. And by the 70s, but definitely by the 80s and stuff, he's lost a lot of his range. He kind of has the voice of a bullfrog at this point. So you're not going to be getting any performances that are anywhere close to comparable with what he was doing in the 60s. So I can't imagine that record is going to be very good, but I haven't heard it, so I'm not going to make a judgment. And that's it. So we got through my entire Kingston Trio collection, which I'm sure people were very excited to see. Like I said, I'll probably do a discography ranking on them at some point in the not too distant future. So get hyped for that. But until then, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. We will continue doing reviews, and we will continue doing these types of videos since I know some people really like them, and I like making them. It's interesting to talk about. And tell a friend as well. Get your friend into record collecting. That's a good sport, good way to waste money, I suppose. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time, right here at your home of the Music Deep Dive.